finally moved, Mike.
Congratulations.
So we can stop, hopefully, for a period, rescheduling, putting things off, messing with things, fussing and fussing and fussing. That's my hope.
Well, I'll do my best to accommodate you, but I am also hoping that is done.
Yes, you and me both. You and me both. Like, this has been a absolute mess scheduling wise because I've been like maneuvering so many people and so many things for months now. And we moved in just a few days ago, and hopefully Joe can slow down a bit. I feel like I've been running ragged. Like, I spent the last 45 minutes finishing off this book because I had no time until today. And here we are. And I'm really, really, really hoping that we can be done with this crazy for a while. I am not, like, I know that people live the type of life that I just came out of perpetually, and that ain't me. Like, I am not,
No.
not made for that. So, yes, here's hoping we're completely done with that for a long time so we can get a break. And I'm sure you would appreciate that as well. So,
Yeah, well, moving is never an easy transition to make. I feel like as a casual observer from the outside, you've handled this one pretty well. You were in the apartment, so you weren't trying to get everything. Typically you buy a house, you sell your old one, you got to get everything over there within 24 hours. It sounds like you at least had a little bit longer timeline, a little bit more margin in order to do some work on the new place before you moved in, stuff like that. So I'm sure it never went as seamlessly as you would hope, though. Everything is more complicated once you get in the middle of a move. So the fact that you're on the other side of it now, congratulations. That's not a small
Thanks.
accomplishment.
It's intense. So I've slept well lately the last few nights, that's for sure. That is for sure. So anyway, Joe's moved. We can set that behind us for a while. I obviously have a lot of work to do yet on the house, but it's not going to be breakneck pace anymore, and we can let the foot off the gas for a little while here. So anyway, all that to say, and I brought that up because we're going to go back to like some longer term follow-up. We've talked about for a while how I've wanted to do like these morning walks as part of like a reflective period, just trying to clear my head, get out in nature, et cetera, et cetera. And I've been able to do that the last few days. And one of the things I hadn't planned on with that is that, when we moved, it occurred to me the first morning we were there that, oh yeah, we have a dog, which means that the dog needs let out in the morning. Well, why don't I just take the dog with me when I go on these walks? So I ended up taking the dog. Jip is his name. Took him with me. And that's been kind of a fun little addition to the morning walk thing because he's, of course, diving off into the woods and trying to investigate every little thing he can possibly find. And it's somewhat of a distraction, but at the same time, it's kind of nice to have the companion there with me. So anyway, morning walks have become a thing, and combine that with evening walks out in the woods, and I'm a fan. I will just say that. It's something I would highly, highly recommend. Now, I also need to mention that I'm extremely spoiled in being able to just go out the back door and do this.
Mm-hmm.
I know that most people cannot do that, so there's that.
Nice. I take my dog running every once in a while. Her name is Lucy. She's a giant golden doodle. She was supposed to be 45 pounds. I think she's 70.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
But she is super gentle, has never tried to jump up on the furniture, snag something off the table, whatever. But she loves going running with me. She sees me start to stretch and she comes and like lays on top of me. It's her way of like, hey, take me with you.
Yep.
And then when I get up, head towards the door, she watches me intently. And if I head over to the little bin where her leash is, she just starts running in circles. She gets so excited.
Yes. Yes.
But I can confirm walks/runs with dogs are better.
It's good to know. It's good to know. Jip's already gotten to the point after just a couple days. He's already like, he doesn't like get on to me whenever, like physically on me whenever I'm getting ready to go out. He goes and stands between me and the door. That way I can't get to the door unless I either shoo him out of the way or let him out the door. So like, there's that. So anyway, so morning walks have become a thing. One of the pieces that I've had going on here is like, okay, how do I go about reconfiguring a daily routine. And if we combine that with some of last episode's follow-up of like incorporating some of the extended mind aspects into a daily routine, I'm realizing that there's a few things happening here, and I haven't figured out how to formally share what this routine is shaping up into, but basically, like, I've done this morning walk thing for a few days now, and we're trying to make sure that we're doing our evening dinner a little bit earlier than we have in the past, because as soon as we're done, we'll clean up as a family, and then I take the girls and we go for a walk outside in the woods through the yard and such. So that's kind of become a thing as well. And we've also been trying to encourage the girls to hunt things down and show them to us whenever they're out exploring and finding things, which has been kind of a cool like homeschool thing as well. So that whole daily routine incorporating the outside pieces is starting to come together. So I'm hoping over the next week or so, we'll get to where we've got kind of a settled rhythm of what that routine is going to look like and how it's changed from apartment life and previous suburban life. So I don't know. It's becoming a thing that I'm slowly formulating. So I'm trying to figure out how to actually like formally share that outside of just trying to explain it here at Bookworm. But I don't know what the answer to that is quite yet. So anyway, daily routines. The last follow-up piece I had here was I want to talk to Becky, my wife, about Rose, our middle daughter, because Rose doesn't always. She's not good about focusing on things during school, and then just completely misses them because a distraction will keep her from being able to internalize what it is that she's being taught. And I think some of that has to do with her being requested to sit still. And we're working through like, how do I keep her moving? Like physically moving while she's working on school. We've played with some ideas, like how do we like give her some stuff and have her walk around the table, like just walk circles around the table, or you give her something to do and have her go upstairs to work on it, as opposed to trying to sit in the same place as all of her sisters as they're doing their stuff. So just trying to encourage like some of that physical movement and activity as she's working on school, and just trying to incorporate that into all of her daily routine stuff with school as well. So there's that. We're getting there, but it's forever a process with kids, right? So
That is the truth.
one step at a time. Anyway, that's what I had for follow-up. How about you, Mr. Michael?
I had two things for follow-up. The first one was to meditate for reals. And I'm not going to say this has stuck, but I have done this.
Okay. Which I feel like you've said this before.
I have.
You've
Yep.
this point in time you've been here before.
That is correct. Now we'll have to check in next time and see if I'm still doing it. But Annie talked about in the previous episode with the extended mind, that one really clicked for me. And the benefits have never felt more real than they do now. Whether that's enough to make me do it every day has yet to be seen, but it's working so far. The second one was to think on paper.
This is the one I'm really interested in.
Yeah, well, I am thinking on paper. One example of this, I don't know if you consider this thinking, but I typically take the recordings, give them to Toby. He edits them, gives them back to me. I review them. And at that point, I write down the chapters and the links and everything. The other way that I do this when I record Focus with David Sparks is we capture everything in a shared Google Doc live. Basecamp is terrible for this, so not going to try to do that with this podcast. But I basically, as we record this, I am doing that on a blank page in my notebook. And I'm finding I am going to a blank page in the notebook to write things more frequently, whether it's just, lists of things from a meeting, or I want to think about this relationship between these different pieces. Like I'm doing this workshop as we're recording this. It's tomorrow, so it'll have already taken place by the time this publishes, but it's this 5-part creativity flywheel that I'm thinking about, with the whole idea of idea development, management, where do ideas come from, input, output, etc. And I have this 5-step thing that I kind of brainstormed on paper. So I'm doing this, and I think it's sticking. On the inverse of this, though, I just did a personal retreat, and I did that totally in Obsidian. and I absolutely love it.
Nice.
Yeah, I
Nice.
have this Wheel of Life thing for my personal retreat process that I think I've shown you. And in the
Hmm.
workbook, I used to just load it up on my iPad in GoodNotes and color in the wheels, from 0 to 10, working their way out. But there's this radar chart using this Charts View plugin where you can overlay two different radar charts on top of each other. So I have the different areas going around and then there's like the different points, and I can compare last quarter to this quarter and see what has either gone up or gone down. And I just absolutely love that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I think there's a place for both of these, but thinking on paper is not something I want to like go all in with. All of my thinking happens on paper, but it's definitely the right tool for certain jobs, and I intend to keep going with it.
I think there's going to be a difference between thinking on paper and storing on paper.
Yeah, definitely.
Like that tends to be a differentiation that I tend to make personally. It's like I capture a lot of things and I process a lot of things on paper, and I do have some paper storage of ideas, mostly tasks and stuff. Though the last couple months I've been basically non-existent with that, and yet there's a place for longer term storage of that, which is I think where Obsidian tends to shine. And I say that, and yet I haven't used that in months at this point either. I've been living in Basecamp, but it's because we've had like so much stuff with the house, and that's the shared place that my wife and I picked to do all of that, which has worked brilliantly. And yet I haven't. Yeah. Anyway, long story short, thinking on paper versus storing on digital, like that's a line I feel like you're talking about here.
Yep, it is. And I know I can grab a picture, throw it up somewhere, but basically the paper is disposable. It's the process of writing things down on it where the value is created. I don't really want it for long-term storage.
Which makes sense. All right. Well, I guess that brings us to today's book, which I think is one that we both were super excited about. I forget who, somebody tweeted this to both of us saying, hey, Ryan Holiday has a new book coming out. And I think you pre-ordered it instantly.
I did.
Whenever you received that tweet, at least if I follow your Twitter replies.
So pro tip for people who want to at me and recommend a book, if you think I'm going to like the book,
Yep.
make sure you include your affiliate link because I will buy it on the spot.
Yep, it's so true. Mike does that instantly. So drop in the Amazon tag and you get a kickback.
Yep.
It's for sure. Yes. Anyway, long story short, Courage is Calling by Ryan Holiday. And this is one that I mean, it just came out as we're recording this. What is it? A couple weeks ago now? Not quite. So by the time this releases, it's about 2 weeks ago plus. So it's a super beginner. I don't want to say beginner. It's the beginnings of a series that Ryan Holiday is writing, which he gets into a little bit in the introduction for this about the 4 virtues. I'm drawing a blank on all of them because I'm trying to place them in my head. But courage, wisdom's in there.
Temperance and justice.
Temperance and justice. There you go. And this is the first of those 4 in Courage. So he has 3 more coming, as we already are aware. He's already made that known to us. So there are 3 more books coming on the other 3 topics: temperance, wisdom, justice. And this one being the courage one, I feel like is a great place to start because it's the foundation that I believe the other 3 are going to build on. So as much as we tend to bemoan 3-part books and 3-part series and such, he's doing a 4-part series. But he started that with a 3-part book. So it's not always bad. We found that out last time. Like if you can make it all work, it does work out. And I think it does in this case as well. So anyway, Courage is Calling. That's today's book. Super excited to go through this one with you.
Yes, this will be a fun one. Ryan Holiday is my jam. I'll just get that out of the way at the beginning here. So I like this book a lot. I do feel like his tone is changing a little bit as we read more Ryan Holiday books. In fact, in the conclusion, he kind of explains why that is. So, yeah, let's jump in here.
Yeah. So The three parts here are fear, courage, and the heroic. Those are the parts. And then he has chapters, I guess you would call them chapters underneath of this. This felt very Seth Godin-ish
Yep, that's what I
to
thought
me.
of.
And, where he's got like, maybe it's a page on this one and 4 pages on that one. It's that sort of thing. So in this particular case, like the first one has almost 20 chapters in it. If you count them all out, it's somewhere around there. The second one with courage has closer to 25, and then the last one's around 15, 20, somewhere in there. And so if you count those all as chapters, there's a lot of chapters in this book. And yet it's classic Ryan Holiday in that there's a lot of stories in this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I've heard hardly any of these stories before. I remember we talked about that in his last book, where he has done the research. He's so well read that he knows what stories are repeated over and over again. There are topics that he brings up here that I felt like, oh, this is the story that goes with this, that we've heard how many times, and then he picks something I've never heard of.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. There's Holiday for you.
It's true. I told my wife at one point, I said, I want to be Ryan Holiday. He has read a gazillion books, and he basically takes the books that he's read and sells them in his own bookstore in Austin, Texas. And I think it's called The Painted Porch, if I remember correctly. I didn't know he had a bookstore down there. I want to go down just to visit the bookstore now. But I would love to do that kind of thing. Just read that much and understand that much, and not collect all of the stories and all of the facts, but kind of what he does. There's things that he talks about that we've heard about before, but like you said, he picks out one detail from that whole story, chucks the rest of it, and then presents that to support his ideas. So that it's a really, really cool and effective way to write. Going back to your point about the Seth Godin flavor of the small chapters, this I thought of that too. The practice that we had read, and this feels like Seth Godin meets Stoic philosophy. That's the best way to describe it, I think.
Let's jump into what we've got for an outline here. So the 3 parts, obviously we'll follow those. There's so many chapters here. You have to cherry pick one. So I, played it the way that editors played it and picked 3 for each of them. Feel free to add to those as we go through it, Mike. But the first one, actually, the very first one isn't an actual chapter, I guess, technically. But it comes from one of the chapters in a definition of fear, which I've not heard before, but I feel like I should have. Maybe you've heard this one before, but it follows the acronym FEAR, false evidence appearing real. Have you heard of this before, Mike? This was brand new to me.
I had heard this before, but I don't know. He's very effective in how he describes it, because he brings together a whole bunch of things from a whole bunch of different perspectives. So I'd heard that definition before, and he opens this whole section kind of with a whole bunch of stuff from the Bible. And he's not a Christian, I don't think. He's just studied enough that he has pulled in these different philosophies from religious texts, and he does that with some of the other religions as well. So he doesn't like get deep into the original Greek and Hebrew meanings and all that kind of stuff, but he takes it at King James Version at face value and blends that with a lot of the Stoic philosophy stuff. And I thought that was pretty effective. Essentially, that's what I try to do with faith-based productivity. Not even necessarily intentionally. It's just like how my mind goes. The reason I wrote my book in the first place was I was teaching a Bible college class on personal management, and I was studying a lot of productivity stuff at the time, and I was recognizing that a lot of the principles I was reading about in these New York Times bestseller books that we cover for Bookworm were based off of these biblical principles. So it's kind of cool to see somebody else making those connections.
Right. It honestly made me, he brought it up so often, it made me question if he was Christian, because I know we've talked about that before, him not being, but like he knows it well enough and talks about it enough that it kind of made me second guess that a little bit. But anyway, that's a side point.
So let me jump in there real quick, because I think you and
Okay.
I in our echo chambers, right?
Yep.
We tend to think, well, as soon as anyone encounters the facts that we've encountered, that automatically points to a conversion experience, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But also, one of the things I've learned from some of these books that we've read is that we need to find people who aren't like ourselves. And so that's the niche that Ryan Holiday fills for me, is like, he has heard some of this stuff and he's got a little bit different take on it. Doesn't mean he's wrong, and it's different enough that I can glean things from reading his books very easily. Like, it's not too far separated. I feel like we could have a very effective conversation about some of these ideas, but he's also not going to just be somebody who's like, oh yeah, of course. And I feel like that's the most effective form of dialogue.
Absolutely. I will say, like, he does bring it up, some biblical texts in some scenarios where it made me reconnect to what I've learned about that specific story in the Bible, and then it like expands it to, like, it's this weird like thing we learned in How to Read a Book. As much as we didn't like that book, the more it comes up.
Yep.
But the interconnectedness of books, and you don't often run across mainstream nonfiction books that do that with the Bible. And this one does that. So it's kind of this, to me, it's kind of strange that I've got, okay, well, now I've got things interconnecting to this religious text. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good, but it's just not something I'm used to. So there is that piece.
One example of this, I think it's from the second chapter, is that he has a number, and I forget what the number is, but he says, "Be not afraid" is the most often repeated phrase in the entire Bible. So obviously he's looked at the entire text. He's not just doing a Command F to see how many, different phrases come up. He's familiar enough with it to talk about it intelligently, and his why behind why that phrase is important maybe is a little bit different than the one that really resonates with me, but that doesn't mean that that's wrong. The whole chapter that comes from, the important thing is to not be afraid. 100% can get on board with that. So some of the Stoic stuff that he talks about, I'm sure we'll get into this as we go, feels a little bit weird to me, but I just kind of take the ideas and the stories and apply my own meaning to them.
Yeah.
Which is surprisingly easy to do.
I don't know if he's studied or figured out how to do that, or if it's just the nature of the topic. I'm not sure which that is. It may be a combo of both, but yes, it's very relatable in that sense. So anyway, I want to come back to false evidence appearing real, the acronym for FEAR here, because I hadn't heard this. And whenever I stop and think about the things that I'm afraid of, or I have a slight fear of, which then holds me back from either making a phone call or speaking up or acting in some way that I've wanted to do for a long time. Exercise would be the one that most people would think of. False evidence appearing real. Like, okay, well, that's fine. If there's false evidence appearing real that's holding me back, what is that false evidence? We talked about this, I think, a little bit last time. It's like whenever you articulate something that's in your mind, or you're forced to put words to something like a thought or an action, it makes it less intimidating and more real, or more absurd, depending on what it is. Like, oh, I'm not running because I don't like my shoes. Like, that happens, right? So if you're not a runner and it's because you don't like your shoes, like, that's a real easy thing to solve. But until you take the time to articulate that, you don't even realize that that's the problem, and that's why you're not running every day. So anyway, I appreciated the acronym.
There's a definition of fear that I really like, which is believing that what you can't see will come to pass. And I have also heard faith defined the exact same way: belief that what you can't see will come to pass. And I think there is a lot of truth to the positive, negative, you attract what you meditate on sort of a thing. I don't think it's as simple as you just confess something and then it automatically manifests. But I also think that a lot of people who have those knee-jerk negative reactions to the books like the the life-changing magic of thinking big or something like that. There's an element of truth there, and the challenge is always to figure out what, for me anyways, I'll talk about my own personal experience. The challenge for me is always to figure out what I am doing wrong. I know some people will approach these types of books a little bit differently, and they will kind of think like, well, this person is full of it because I've tried X and it's not worked for me. And so they just discount the entire message. And I feel like that is a mistake. Just because you're not getting the same results, I mean, maybe what they're saying is packaged like snake oil, and it's, you just got to do these 3 things and your life is automatically going to be awesome. And it's never that simple. Even if it was for them, everybody's situation is different. But I do believe that we can learn something from from everybody, and that positive and negative attracting what you are, that is I've seen that in my own life. That's why journaling is so important to me, and why a lot of people would say it's so important that I get into meditation, right? Because you recognize when you're in those negative spaces and you don't even realize that that is the energy that you are creating. And so at that point, if your focus is negative, then you start seeing all the stuff that's going wrong in your life. And it just completely zaps your motivation to do anything, because all this junk's going to happen to me anyways, because you're looking for it. It's confirmation bias at that point, as opposed to focusing on things that are going right, expressing gratitude, recognizing the growth that's happened. Instead of being frustrated that you're not where you thought you should be, you can look back over the last 6 months, year, whatever, say, well, at least I'm not where I was at the beginning of that season, and look how much I've grown. All I got to do is keep going. My pastor's got this saying, day by day, play by play. You never get the whole thing just mapped out, and you don't walk it out exactly like you think it will be, as trying to move. There's a whole bunch of audibles that happen, a whole bunch of unexpected things you got to work around, but you can work around them. It doesn't, when you hit a roadblock, doesn't mean that you've gone the wrong way. The obstacle is the way, to bring it back to a previous Ryan Holiday book.
It's so true. If you look at something like a remodel and a move, which has been my life the last few months, I've been trying not to beat that dead horse, but it's been something that's taught me a lot about being able to make quick decisions, quick, accurate, wise decisions, and being able to do so in a way that is helpful to the people around me and not hurtful to people in the process. Because we're making calls, or at least I was, that this could impact the way our house operates for the next decade. And I have to make that decision in the span of about 10 minutes. That happens and has happened many times. Do I want to pull an extra wire to this side of the house? Well, technically I could do it later, but tearing a ceiling out in order to add a wire to the other side of the room is just not going to happen. So I need to make that call now and project what the future is going to look like. So anyway, making quick decisions is something that I think is extremely valuable, but takes a lot of experience to be able to make, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So anyway, yes, false evidence appearing real. I really appreciate it. One of the other chapters here, and again, there's a bunch we're going to skip over, and there's not really any way around that, I don't think. But one of the other chapters here is never question another man's courage. And this one kind of gave me pause, because basically the concept here is that you shouldn't question what other people are doing, because you don't always know the internal struggle that they're fighting with. And as much as we love to jump to conclusions and say, how could you do that? Well, you don't understand what happened to get them there. I mean, take this pandemic that seems to go on forever, and think about all of the small business owners, your church leaders, the government leaders. Think about what they have to go through in order to make decisions. Whether you like what they're deciding or not, doesn't matter. And whether they're doing a good job or not, that doesn't matter in this case. Like it's all about what are they going through to make those decisions. If you're anywhere near connected to someone who's had to make those decisions, then you tend to give a little more grace when there's a decision made that you don't like, because you know what went through, like what trauma they went through to try to get that decision made. So anyway, never question another man's courage. Like, this is one that really makes me stop and like, okay, yes, I want to critique. I want to say, hey, you shouldn't do that. But what am I doing? And what are they going through to do the thing that I'm not doing? I guess that's the point.
It sounds so simple, right? Just give somebody the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Super simple, right?
But in the moment, we have so much trouble with that. And I think that's kind of Ryan Holiday's point from this section, because he explicitly says, don't ask what would I do in their shoes, but ask what am I doing right now, which I think is a very effective question. This is Ryan Holiday at his best. That exact phrase, what it's doing is it is putting all of the responsibility and the ownership on creating a better outcome instead of on the leader who you don't agree with their decision and you have no idea what they've gone through in order to arrive at that decision, on you and what you can do, even though you're not at the top of the totem pole, to help create a better environment for everybody else. But he does it in a single sentence. He doesn't spend 3 paragraphs explaining why personal responsibility is such an important trait. He just throws it back in your face. And I find that very effective reading this book, but I know some people are not going to like that at all. It can be very uncomfortable.
It's very frustrating.
It is, yeah.
Just let me be angry. Can I just be angry? Please just let me be angry.
Yeah, let me just be mad at the people who are out to get me and think that there's a conspiracy everywhere. You know, the other thing that I appreciate with this book on the whole idea of the conspiracy theories, there's a lot of historical examples here. A lot of stories from like Martin Luther King Jr., and I forget some of the other ones, but they're all hundreds of years old, some of them, and they were going through stuff that wasn't fair. And when I read that, it just made me realize that, yes, there probably is stuff going on right now that we don't know about that isn't right. So what? It has always been that way. You can get upset that it's happening, or you can do your best where you are with what you have to help combat it, to stand up for the truth, to have courage. That's his whole point with this whole book. And I'm seeing people that I know who are just becoming more and more bitter about these things that they are convinced people are doing behind closed doors that is completely wrong, and it's advancing an agenda that they don't agree with. And I want this to come out the right way. Like, part of me wants to tell them, like, so what? Even if that's true, what is worrying about it gonna help with? And even if it is true, what can you actually do about it? It's not like you're going to find a fact and share it with a newspaper, and then all of a sudden every wrong is going to be made right. You have to do your best to live a life of integrity, a life of character, a life of courage, and then trust that everything else is going to work out in the end. Let the chips fall where they may. It just seems to me, as I see them get all worked up about some of this stuff, it's like, what an exhausting, frustrating way to live.
Yeah, I find that in our household we call them crazy makers, but there are just people who focus on all the bad things and want to scream and moan and complain about it. Even with my kids, like, I have a 6-year-old that I have to tell this to constantly, which is indicative of the actions we're talking about here, in that whining and complaining doesn't solve the problem. You're welcome to moan and complain and cry. That's fine. But what is the thing you need to do to solve the problem? Like, that's really what we're talking about here. And I just had this 2 days ago in one of my kids, in this case, Rose, wanted to take extra donuts. We had extra donuts from dad spoiling them for first day being in the new house. And they were having the leftover donuts for a snack in the afternoon. And we had cut them up into different pieces so that you could have different types. You get it. And she was gathering one of all the ones she hadn't had yet, which meant that her plate was quite tall. We had a mountain going on this plate. And I told her, it's like, Rose, you can't do that. And before I could get the explanation out to just like, here's why, because I need you to understand this, instantly, I haven't had any of these, and you don't want me to be able to have any of the stuff that I haven't had before. It's like, whoa, 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 hold up. I could take that whole plate from you right now. Like, you don't have to have this. And the thing here is that in this particular case, think about the other people who are here. You have your sisters, you have the other adults who are here. Like, if you take what you just did, your sisters don't get any, and the other folks who are coming in to have snack at the same time don't get any. How would you feel if someone else did what you just did? Like this whole empathy thing, right? And just trying to explain that to her. But the whining and complaining was the piece that jumped out to me. Like, yeah, she's a kid, she wants donuts, I get it. Like, that's totally fine. She's 6, right? There's a level of grace that needs given here. So just explaining is like, okay, whining and complaining doesn't solve the problem of you wanting to have all of these things. If you think about this, I know a way to where you can get what you want, and then you can help other people at the same time. Like, there is a way to do this, but you have to stop the whining and complaining and start acting and asking questions in order to get to that point. It was a fun learning experience for her. I have no idea if any of it got through. Probably not, but it's at least a point in the process. But that whole, like, the whining piece drives me up a wall. Coming back to society and what people are doing is like when people just start moaning and complaining and yelling and screaming, that doesn't solve anything other than make other people mad and angry. And it's only when you start acting on it and doing something about it that you can start going forward. Anyway, I'm rambling at this point. I'm going to quit.
Well, you're kind of setting it up actually to go into the next section, maybe not intentionally, but one of the things that stood out to me from this whole book really is the contrast of fear and love. So the opposite of fear is, how does he define it? I think he says in this first section that it's apathy. But then he talks about in the next sections how the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. You don't really care enough to make a decision one way or the other. So essentially what he's talking about this whole section with fear is this is how you are feeling. It doesn't have to stop you from acting. And the action needs to be tied to a motivation that is bigger than yourself. That's what I get from that story of your your kid. It's all about them. And I have kids that similar scenarios just this week. It's all about them. At some point, you've got to become an adult, though, and quit being so selfish. And there's a lot of quote unquote adults who haven't really got that memo yet. I do think, though, that this whole, I don't know, I'm not quite sure what to do with the rest of this section, because the next part with courage, that's really the thing that's fascinating to me is when you connect to a vision that is bigger than yourself, it can cause you to do some pretty amazing things. So the first section here, this is all just about staring the giant down that's in front of you. But the next part is the exciting part to me. You had one more point on here, though, that all growth is a leap. And maybe that's the place to go from here, because there is no certainty here. You have to go beyond what you think you are capable of. And this reminds me a lot. In fact, he mentions the second mountain later on, where you climb that first mountain, David Brooks, that book that we read. It's all about you and getting what you want out of life. And you get to the top of that mountain and you look around and you're like, is this it? And then you realize, oh, there's another mountain that's not about you. And that's really the one you should have been climbing the whole time.
Yes. So I put all growth is a leap. This is one of the subsections under fear. I put that in here because it's one of these that you could easily misconstrue, I think. Or maybe not misconstrue, but it's easy to look past it because we don't want to put ourselves in a place where we can't go back. This is one of the places where I was like, okay, the whole burn the boats story. Like, this is one where I fully expected that story to come up. It's like, okay, when you land and you have to fight to go forward, burn the boats, because then you can't go back and your only option is to win the battle. Like, that's the story that I expected to hear that. Here, that, of course, didn't come up. So I was very grateful to not have the same story again. So there's that. But anyway, all growth is a leap. The point here is that if you overcome fear and you're able to make that leap, it then grows you as a person, and then you become a better person through
Yes.
that. Like, that's the concept here. And this is approaching the end of this part where we're starting to get into the courage piece. And like, it just struck me as like, this is a thing that I don't like to do. Nobody likes to put themselves out there unnecessarily, but that's exactly what he's calling us to do here, is like, jump, make that leap. You'll grow, you'll be better when you're done. It may be uncomfortable, but that's the point. That's what he's wanting you to do.
Yes, exactly. I found that quote, by the way. I messed it up a little bit, so let me correct it quick.
Okay.
It's from We Are Afraid to Believe. The opposite of courage is not fear, it is apathy. So the point still kind of stands that you've got this choice in front of you. You can take the courageous path, you can take the fearful path, but you know you can't stay where you are. Apathy is just kind of like, whatever, I don't really care.
Yeah.
But the thing from the section that you were talking about that challenges me is continue to put yourself in a position where you have to make a leap, which is terrifying to think about. I'm kind of in a position right now where I need to do that in an area of my life, and I don't look forward to it. But I know it's good. I mean, it's kind of interesting, the timing of reading this book for me, because it is essentially a message that I need to hear right now. Because there's some things that are changing, and it's not going to be easy. There's going to be some difficult conversations, and I can try to avoid them because I'm a people pleaser, but that's just going to prolong the inevitable, and it's not ultimately going to be beneficial for anybody involved. So I walk away from this particular section where it's encouraging me just to lean into it. And I feel like that encouragement, sometimes it just takes one other person. It doesn't have to be somebody close to you who believes in you, that's enough for you to take that leap. And that's inspiring to me to try to do that for other people. I don't think I have a huge platform in people's lives, and I don't think that I've accomplished a whole ton, but I know that there are at least a handful of people that think a little bit differently. And I'm encouraged reading that section to try to help as many of those people as I can. Not to get too busy with the things that I have to do, but to recognize the people who are looking up to me and who just need a little bit of encouragement to step out there and see what they're really capable of.
Yeah, I feel like this is a good place to jump into the second part for courage, based on what you were just saying, which, he starts this off with a very brief definition here. Very first line of the whole part: courage is the management of and the triumph over fear. And when you stop and work your way through that, if you think about the specific fears that you're dealing with, whether it's publishing a YouTube video or putting an article out there or saying yes to a promotion, even like any of those, if you think about it, like, well, yeah, you're overcoming a fear of some sort. Well, that's courage, to use his definition there. And I like that. I mean, it's a good way to start us off here. And one of the parts that he specifically calls out in one of these little subchapter things is preparation makes you brave. Brave is kind of a synonym he's using in places and to complement courage as well. And preparation is one that, I've found that when you're well prepared, it's easy to have courage to make that leap and overcome a fear in some form. To use kind of one of our house things, I took the leap and pulled an electrical permit as part of our big remodel, which terrified me because it meant that I was going to be forced to do it all absolutely the right way. I've done a lot of electrical. I'm not afraid of pulling cords and running electrical wires. It's something I'm very comfortable doing. But I've reached that point by, having taken a class in college and having worked around and with electricians over time. And like, there wasn't really anything in this process that I felt like I couldn't do. I've wired new breakers into panels. Like, this is not something that daunts me. But I have an inspector who's going to come in and look it all over. And
Yeah.
I've had him in twice now. And we've got to do a final, which is going to be an extremely minor, quick thing. But the hard one's already done. And at this point in time, like, I feel like I'm really well set up to do any form of electrical in the future. But some of that is because, like, I felt like I had the courage to step forward and do that whole process with the inspector because of the preparation I'd had wiring things on the farm, or, previous things I've done in the past in school and such. So having that preparation makes it easier to have the courage to jump out and, overcome some of those fears. And it doesn't feel like it has to be as big of a leap whenever you're doing that.
Yeah, I understand the point that he's making in that particular section. I feel like this chapter out of the whole section was least helpful to me, though. Because at some point, doesn't matter how well prepared you are, there's still going to be an element of risk involved, and you're going to have to make the leap.
Yes.
So I totally understand and empathize with the person who needs to hear this specific advice that, yes, you can make it easier by thinking it through and preparing the best that you can. But for somebody like me who will prepare and prepare and prepare and prepare and prepare and not do the actual thing, this one, I kind of read it and I was like, that one's not for me. I did like this section, though, about the courage being contagious. This is kind of from the first chapter here where you talked about the definition of courage. But he mentions that courage, like fear, is contagious, and he splits the world into two groups, cowards and non-cowards.
Yeah.
And so it inspires me to be one of the non-cowards. And the truth is, if you think about this, we all have opportunities to be a coward or a non-coward every single day, in sometimes small ways, sometimes big ways. And it's the choices that you make every single day that get you to the point where you can really dig in your heels when something big needs to be pushed back on. One of the stories that he mentioned here is actually a very, very small mention of this, but do you know who August Landmasser is?
Mm-mm.
Have you seen that picture of the crowd and everybody in it is doing the Nazi salute except for one guy in the back with his arms crossed?
Oh, yeah, I have seen that.
Yeah, that's August Landmasser. And
Okay, sure.
he mentions August Landmasser, does not mention anything else about him, at least not that I could remember. But I read that and I was like, that's interesting. That name sounds familiar. Who is that guy? So at that point, I put the book down and I went and Googled August Landmasser. And I saw that picture and I was like, oh, okay. And then there's obviously all of the inspirational messages around, like, be this guy, right? The face of evil is standing right in front of you and you're willing to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do that. Which immediately I thought of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the Bible. Same sort of situation.
Yep.
King of Babylon says, bow down and worship this golden statue. And they're like, no, we're not going to do it. So he throws them in the fiery furnace and they survive. But August Landmasser, I dug into the story behind this because I wanted to know who this guy was. He wasn't just some random dude who's like, nah, I don't like you, Hitler. He actually joined the Nazi party in 1930 because he was indifferent and he thought that the German economy was in shambles. Being a card-carrying Nazi would be an in for him somewhere and he'd be able to get a job. So he's working at this shipyard and Adolf Hitler stops by and they have this big rally. This picture, they believe, was taken on June 13th, 1936. And August Landmesser had a secret relationship with a Jewish woman starting in 1935. So,
Whoops.
yeah. So obviously he's got other motivations here, which again, getting back to like the whole thing that really spoke to me about this whole book is the motivation of love. Because if you just want to take a stand against something, at some point, personally, I believe you will crack. But if you have a motivation beyond yourself, something else, someone else that you want to protect, the motivation at that point being love is positive. It's not negative. Oh, I just want to stick it to this guy. That's the most powerful motivation that you can have. So this is totally a tangent from 2 sentences in this "It's Good to Be Difficult" chapter.
Yeah.
That inspired me to go do all this study and find out this thing. But that's the kind of research that Ryan Holiday puts into this. Point being that there is a whole lot more if you want to dig to find it.
He does that in a lot of places. He'll just throw a name out. And I'm grateful to say we've read so much that there's very few of those that I felt like, oh, I don't know who that is. But there are a handful, and that was one of them. And I was like, I don't know who that is, and it doesn't bother me right now, so I didn't bother to dig deep into it. But yes, there's so much where it's like that interconnectedness between other books and such. One of the other sections here in the courage piece is one that I feel like I really resonate with. The title of it is called Go, which is basically don't think, just act. That's the gist of this.
The Jocko Willink chapter.
I know, yes. Jocko Willink comes up in this one. And if you take the time to process how dangerous something is, or all the things that could go wrong, or how much of a threat there is out there, you're going to have more tendencies to not go. So instead of taking the time to process, just act. This is something as an ADD person I know is very, very important, because I can question myself for hours before doing something. So moving quickly and not giving myself time for that transitional question mark is a very, very good thing. This isn't connected to this particular chapter, but early on, there's a story about a couple guys who were, I think it was Ulysses S. Grant and one other guy that were trying to make a run back to camp so that they weren't AWOL, and we're hearing wolves.
Yep.
The other guy, not Grant, said, "How many wolves do you think there are?" Grant was like, 20? Like, that's what it sounds like. And they get up towards them and find out it's 2.
Yep.
And they keep riding right at them, and they just run off.
Yep.
Like, well, if you just keep going, like, a lot of times those fears are squashed before you even have time to realize how dangerous it could be. Or even if it's not a fully dangerous thing, like, you don't have time to think about how, I guess, like, what other people are going to think about you in the process. So you're better off just don't bother.
Mm-hmm.
Just move. Go.
Yeah, that chapter reminded me of something that is in the focus course. Action brings clarity. The point being that as soon as you start moving, usually that's when you figure out what the next step is. And this is the difficult part. How do you reconcile that with the preparation makes you brave? Because I feel like it's different almost in every situation. Sometimes you do need to do the preparation. If you were to call in the electrician and they're going to make sure you're up to code, and you're like, oh, I just figured, I'd get started. No. Rip it all out, start over.
Yep.
But for a lot of the creative work that you and I do, and probably a lot of people that listen to this who have a dream to start a podcast, create a YouTube video, write a blog post, write a book, whatever, the opposite is true. You don't need to have it all figured out. You just got to step out there and start doing it. And then as you do that, the path becomes clear. I don't think you can boil it down to a single formula, which is kind of refreshing. Talking about this book, it's almost like an encyclopedia of everything related to courage, and you kind of have to pick and choose the elements that apply to your own personal situation. But I think there's benefit to that. It's not going to scratch the itch for somebody who wants a quick fix to something, but that's kind of the point. There is no quick fix.
Yeah.
There's just you taking responsibility for your own life. In fact, one of the things he says in this section is that you are never powerless. Courage, he says, in that chapter, you can always resist. Courage is defined as saying, not if I can help it. And the truth is, there are always opportunities for you to say no to things. He shares a really cool one at the end of the book, which we'll hopefully talk about in a little bit. But you read that stuff in this particular section, and it gets me thinking about all of the different places that I can take a tiny stand in some way.
Yeah, I feel like, if we go back to the preparation versus go pieces, this is partly why I picked those two, because they do conflict with each other somewhat. And they also conflict a little bit with the next one, make it a habit as well, which is essentially, whenever you have something you're fearful of, make it a point to stand up. Like, don't be afraid to cause, a big stink. Don't be afraid of putting your neck out there. Like, make that a habit. And when you see those things come up, do it repeatedly. And then it doesn't become as big of a deal to you, even though, it's a very common experience. But anyway, if you're making it a habit, you're preparing, but the preparation versus go piece and how those conflict. Like, yes, preparation can delay the going, but they're two separate entities. Like, if you take the electrical thing, like, I had prepared by doing electrical in years past. But in the moment of deciding, like, should I pull a permit and have an inspector, or should I try to fly this under the radar? It's like, nope, just get it pulled and then don't think about it. Like, fill out the paperwork, do it done, and don't worry about, how dangerous or scary that's going to be to, well, not dangerous, but how scary that's going to be to try to go through what I'm doing with somebody who knows this inside out.
Yeah, and kind of along with that, making it a habit is the courage to commit, which is a chapter in here. And I love this quote from page 153. Losers have always gotten together in little groups and talked about winners.
It's true.
So don't be part of the loser group. Be part of the winner group who's actually doing the things.
Yes.
Even if you're scared to get started.
All right. So what does that bring us to? The last section here, the heroic, which is basically the person behind all of this who's having the courage to overcome the fear. But at the same time, like, it has a very specific turn to it. So far, we've been talking about internally in yourself, like having the courage to overcome something internal, an internal fear. But the heroic takes a twist on it, and it's having the courage to risk yourself for the sake of someone else. So now we're involving a third or a second person in this process. And I think I would say that courage, when we think about courage, like the quintessential, he had courage, like we generally would think about someone in a battle that's doing something to save someone else, like saving the damsel in distress, like that whole concept. At least that's where my brain goes. That's the first instinct I have whenever somebody mentions the word courage, is like overcoming something to save someone else or for someone else. It's not always an internal battle. He saves that for the very end. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, we've got the groundwork laid. Like, here's the fear side. Here's the courage of overcoming that fear. And then, by the way, we can overcome that fear and help other people at the same time. And that's where we get to this heroic piece. And one of the early pieces that, or early chapters he has here is titled "The Cause Makes All." And this is something I think we were talking about society today. People have a lot of causes that they fight for, and absolutely they're having the courage to stand up and overcome the fear to fight for those causes, absolutely 100%. But at the same time, there are a lot of cases where that cause doesn't actually have that many people behind it, and not that many people actually care about it. They're just blowing it all out of proportion so they have a reason to fight.
Yes.
And that's a problem.
Yes.
Make sure the cause is actually a legitimate cause first.
Yeah, make sure it's not a selfish cause, I think, is a better way to sum it up, maybe.
Yes.
I love this whole section. This is where the very first chapter, he says the opposite of fear is love. And the cause makes all, heroes have a reason. He mentions jumping on a grenade only matters if it accomplishes something. And the very next chapter kind of gets into what you were just talking about with identifying the right cause. It says the braver thing is not to fight. And I think this is the chapter where he starts to talk about Abraham Lincoln, and not the way that
Yep.
he's typically portrayed as someone who stood up against slavery. Eventually it came to that, but that's not where he started. He basically was trying to prevent conflict. At least the Ryan Holiday version of this story. The South eventually found a motivation for starting a fight based off of a selfish motivation. And at that point, Abraham Lincoln had the courage, heroism, whatever, to not back down. One of the things that he says in this chapter, which I thought is great, be willing to negotiate and compromise, but not to run away. And that heroes fight just as hard to prevent a conflict as they do inside the conflict they find themselves in. But ultimately, that conflict, if you can avoid it, that's the best course of action, even if it means that you have to lose face. Being right doesn't matter, he says, let the other person save face. And I was thinking through that and what that looks like for me. I feel like this is something I can agree with, but I would have a hard time applying. I tend to see things as very black and white. This is right, this is wrong. And I don't have a specific action item with this because I don't think that there is conflict that could be avoided that I find myself in frequently where I can practice this. But I do want to take a note of this, and the next time I find myself there, find myself asking, how can I give the other person an out here? Even if I think I'm right, me getting my way isn't the important thing. The important thing is, number one, that we do what's right, not what's easy. But number two, if it's really not that big a deal and they think they won, who cares? You know, I'm not sure I'm doing a very good job of explaining this, but this part was challenging to me.
Yeah, I think that, okay, I know I preface this a lot, but of course I work at a church and I have many opinionated people who like to offer their thoughts to me. And some of those thoughts and opinions that are offered can lead to some battles occasionally, or can cause me to need to act on them. Like I'm basically forced into making either a public decision or, yes, anyway, something along those lines. And there are a number of cases where I have to go through the process of listening and trying to gather all the information about something when I know at the very beginning I'm not going to do anything with it. And yet the actual action, and this kind of goes into the last part that I've got down here for the heroic, is silence is violence. And it's where choosing not to say something can cause a mess.
Correct.
And can make a big stink. And sometimes that's what you need. And I have had, especially over the last year and a half, I've had a number of decisions that I've had to make as a tech director that have impacted our entire church, I feel like for the good, and yet I'm going to get a lot of criticism on those decisions and have people reaching out directly to me for those decisions because I know if I do certain things in certain ways, it's going to impact the way church runs because the entire church is live stream only. Like that has happened. So there is a lot of power with that, but at the same time, like I know that sometimes choosing not to fight a battle is the harder road to take when the other person is just trying to get a fight. Like that's not what you need. But at the same time, I've had cases where someone is specifically asking me for something and to do something, and I just choose not to respond. And I have had that many times, and I don't like it. But I just have to choose. Like if I say, yep, I'll do that, then I've got a big problem. If I say, no, I'm not going to do that, I have a big problem. But if I just decline to answer and do nothing, it forces the other person to then make a decision and act from there, which is actually what needs to happen. But that's really, really not fun
No.
to do. It'd be a lot easier for me to just say yes or no.
Right. And when you have too much to do, that's kind of what you fall back into, is just yes or no. And then you've got some conflict. But I don't know, maybe from an outside perspective, it's easier to see. But in that sort of situation, you did a much better job of painting a picture of what this might look like than I was doing. You've got somebody who's telling you to do something you know isn't the right thing to do. You can just say yes, go along with it, even though you don't want to do it. You can say no, stand up for what you think is right. Now you've got conflict you've got to resolve. The harder option, number C, is to say, well, what do you think about doing it this way? Because then we could do X, Y, Z. Yeah, I think that's what we should do. And then you respond, oh, great idea. You paint it as like their suggestion, and wow, you're so smart. That's more work. And in the moment when you're just trying to get stuff done, you don't want to navigate that. And that maybe is oversimplifying it too, because it almost sounds like manipulative, but you get the point. That's a ridiculous example maybe of how you could save face but still get your way if you believe that this is a hill that is worth dying on. But I think my default reaction tends to be the stand up for no, this is not the right thing. How dare you even suggest this? What were you thinking? And now people's feelings are hurt and we have to sort through stuff.
I would say, just to put a little more meat to this, to give you an example of how this has panned out. It's like, okay, well, from a tech stance, I'm in charge of what the overall production of our live stream looks like and how it operates. What camera angles are we using? What are the overlays? What are the graphics? What's the flow of that live stream? Because it's very different than if you're in the building, in the sanctuary / worship center, as we call it. And with that, the camera angles and stuff that we tend to take regularly have the congregation in those shots. Because the one thing that we have chosen to do, the direction at least everybody's on board with, that's kind of the direction I've set, is that the live stream is to make it feel like you are in the seats in the room. When you're in the seats in the room, you have people right next to you or close to you, you're worshiping together. Thus, the cameras are designed to make you have that feel and try to make it feel like you're there in the room. The downside of that is that it's not always visually entertaining, which is what people expect from a video broadcast. It's not a big, overly done, lots of flashing lights, lots of quick camera angles. That's not it, because that's not the point. And we could do that, but I have people who tell me, like, you need to do, faster switching on your camera because it makes it feel more like it's, a fun experience. They do that in the Super Bowl all the time. It's like, hey, guess what? We're not watching the Super Bowl. Like, this is church. Like, this is very different. And whenever people have asked me that, or they've told me, it's like, you need to do this, I can either say, yes, you're correct, which then implicates me to do something about it. I could say no, in which case I've got a big, long, drawn-out explanation for why. And in some cases, depending on the person, I will go through with that. But I've had enough people tell me this that in most cases, I just choose not to respond to them, because they're generally in an email whenever people do this. And if it's that important to them, it's like, come find me. And make it a real deal instead of, taking the easy way out and sending an email. But anyway, that's where I tend to land on some of this. Like, okay, yes, I get your opinion. I'm not going to take the time to respond to it in this particular case, because it's not a battle worth fighting yes or no on this. It's way too nuanced for that.
And ultimately, you have to consider the source.
Anyway, there you go.
Right. So this is one person offering their opinion, and they don't realize all of the other data points and all the other people that it impacts. I don't know what the right solution there is, but ultimately the ideal outcome is that they feel heard, right? And maybe you don't go along with their suggestion, but at least they know that it was considered, even though maybe you've heard it for the 100th time in this email. Yeah,
Yeah, and I do tell folks, like, some of our staff knows that, if someone's going to offer an opinion about how the tech side of things run on a Sunday morning, my expectation is that you are going to find me on a Sunday morning, or you're going to request time to talk about it, because this is such a nuanced side of, what happens, that I'm rarely going to just take a flippant request
Mm-hmm.
and listen to it unless it's from one of
Yeah.
my tech team. If it's from one of them, that's a different conversation. But they're not going to do that. They're going to say, "Hey, Joe, I was thinking about," and they're going to give me a full explanation, and they're going to make a pitch, and they're going to do all, like, they know that, because if they just say, I didn't like the way that was run, that's not going to fly. Like, coming from you, you're going to have to explain. Like, so they know that. Anyway, I'm going off on something we shouldn't be going off on, but all that to say, like, sometimes I
Yeah.
do choose not to answer.
There's so much more in this section. Just a couple things that I really enjoyed. There's a chapter here on going back to the valley. And the story that they mention here is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who escaped to the US and then he went back to Germany where he was executed by the Nazis. And another example came to mind as I read that of Viktor Frankl from Man's Search for Meaning. If you remember at the beginning of that book, he talked about basically he got the visa to go do the research in the US, but he knew his people were going to have to go through some stuff. So he's like, I got to stay here and suffer with them. And
Yep.
that,
Right.
it's easy to think about that and say, well, yeah, they made the right choice. I try to put myself in those positions and I hope that I would be able to make that kind of choice. But I really have trouble saying, yes, I would do that, because I don't think you really know until you face something like that.
Right.
So I have not faced anything like that, but that's true heroism on display. And then the other thing you mentioned, the burn the boats, that pops up again in this section under the chapter, you must burn the white flag, because in addition to the burn the boats story, which he doesn't just rehash because it's been told a million times, he says that you can't just burn the boats, you also have to burn the white flag. So once you get over there, the defeat, surrender is not an option. He says defeat is a choice the brave never choose, which I really liked. The one who won't ever quit will be the winner. And I like that. But again, think about this in context of everything that he's talking about in this section, where love is the motivator. So the one who will never quit, fighting for other people, not fighting for yourself and what you can get. That's inspiring and challenging to me.
All right. What else, Mike? I feel like we've talked about a lot of this, and again, books have been this way lately. There's a ton here that we're not talking about. Of course.
It's true.
Ryan Holiday is really good at that one. Read the book.
Last thing I'll mention from this section, the heroic, because there's a whole chapter here on No One is Unbreakable. And there's this Japanese art of repairing broken dishes and making them better called kintsugi, which I thought was pretty cool. And his big takeaway there is that the world is cruel. You're going to be broken. Courage is getting back up when you've been broken and finding a way to grow stronger at those broken places. Kind of letting the challenge or the trial that you've gone through, letting that be your message or your testimony. That's the strongest message that you have, is that you went through this thing. So not trying to hide that stuff or my life is perfect, yada, yada, yada. But these are the things that I've struggled with, because that's the most powerful version of your story that can really do the most benefit for other people. And then the other thing is probably the conclusion. You want to talk about that real quick?
Sure. Yeah. I think you've been itching to talk about it, so why don't you intro?
All right. So the conclusion, I didn't jot down any notes on this in my MindNode file, but it's basically Ryan Holiday's story from when he was working at American Apparel. And there was a CEO there who had asked him to leak these naked pictures of somebody that was suing him as kind of like this revenge porn thing to discredit them from the lawsuit. And Ryan Holiday, to his credit, said he wouldn't do it, but it's basically him explaining that he failed at that moment to have the courage that he needed, because he realized that even though he wouldn't do it, he didn't stop anything. A week later, he saw the CEO doing an interview with somebody and saw the pictures up on the screen, and he realized that he just got somebody else to leak it instead. And so there's a lot to unpack there. Number one, I think it's cool that Ryan Holiday is willing to share essentially mistakes from his past. That's how he's framing it is, I should have been more brave. I should have had the courage to say, no, this is wrong, not just, I won't do this, but you can't do this. And he talks about some of the threats that he experienced as he got more vocal about standing up for stuff. And I think that's encouraging to hear for other people who know that they need to stand up for the right thing, stand up for the truth, and are scared to do it because something is going to happen. Well, yeah, something might happen. Something happened to Ryan Holiday, but he was able to get through it. So that's inspiring to me on a small level, and I can see that being inspiring to other people. But he basically ends it with kind of like this encouragement that from that moment, he's decided that he is going to try to build that bravery and that courage going forward, which is kind of why he gets into the tone for his books has changed over the years, because he realizes that he does have a platform and he needs to speak out against things that he thinks are wrong. And he shares how he published some op-eds in the New Yorker and lost his job because of it, or his column because of it, that kind of stuff. And I feel like hearing that is inspiring to me, even though I'm not at the level that Ryan Holiday is at. I don't have the op-ed column at the at the New Yorker or wherever, and I haven't published the books that he has. But it's inspiring to see that he's standing up for what he believes is right. He's getting pushed back. There are ramifications for it, but on one level, you kind of see where he is, and you see how he's kind of overcome it all anyways. I feel like being courageous does a couple of things. One, the people who don't agree with you, it makes them mad. But number two, the people who do agree with you, it makes them, for lack of a better term, the raving fans. They are part of your tribe now. And that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be known for. I don't have a specific action item with that. Like, I need to take a stand for this specific thing, but I walk away from this being like, yeah, if Ryan Holiday can do it, then I can do it too.
Yeah, I'm going to hold that thought because I'm going to bring it out here in Style and Rating. But the thing with this whole book that I find fascinating is the ending, because Ryan takes a tact that you don't see many authors take, in that they've just laid out the foundation of the problem, fear, what you do to solve it, courage, and then how to help others with that in the heroic. And then he ends it with his own failure to do exactly that, which is so interesting to me and yet inspiring, that you've got someone who understands this in its entirety and then shows you how they themselves have failed to do the thing they're asking you to do, but then lays out the groundwork for what they're going to do themselves moving forward in the format and the direction of the books that they're writing. In this case, Ryan's choosing these 4 virtues. And I would say it's probably because he's seeing a lot of what we've talked about here in issues with society, and he's wanting to help show a path forward. And I can appreciate that. I really can. So well done, Holiday.
Yeah, and this is the most effective way to communicate, I feel, is not to pretend like you have mastered this stuff, but to share your own failures, to communicate that I am on this journey as well. And I feel like that's difficult to do, especially in a written medium, because all you have is the words. Something more informal like a podcast or even a video, I feel like it's a little bit easier to understand what the person is really saying and who they really are. But when all you have is the message and you don't know the story behind it, it's very easy for any of the advice in a book like this to come across as prescriptive. This is all you got to do. And some people lean into that too much, in my opinion. And they even say, this is all you got to do. And that stuff just is entirely distasteful to me. And like I said, I want to be Ryan Holiday, basically. I feel like he's really good at this. He's a master communicator, at least in the written medium. And I want to leave people feeling the same way that I felt coming away from this book. Like, yeah, this guy's not perfect, but he's genuine. He's doing his very best. He's made mistakes. He's learned from them, and he's getting better. He's going to keep going. He's going to keep growing. That's somebody that I'm willing to listen to.
Well, looking at action items here, I didn't write anything down, Mike, and there's probably some easy ways to explain that, but at the same time, it's strange to me that I've got a book about courage and taking action and, taking a leap and stuff, and yet I don't have anything specific that I wrote down, and it's a bit odd.
Sure.
Because I feel like I should. He even calls out how should is a problem in our society at one point. And yet I feel like I need to act, and I'm not sure on what. Some of that might be that I'm just like within days coming out of crazy. And some of it is like I haven't had the space to figure out what big push I need to make next, if there's a big push I need to make right now. Part of me wants to just take the action item of breathe a little bit and process this one, which I'm going to be taking the space to do, just because, and when I say that, the tactical way of doing that I'm talking about is I'm going to take a couple days off of reading, which I haven't done in a long time, and just kind of marinate on this one a little bit. Because like I said earlier, I spent the last 45 minutes before we recorded finishing this book. And I don't feel like, although we've had a great conversation here and I feel like I really understand what Holiday's talking about, I haven't fully processed what that means to me yet. And I need to do that. So I need to take that specific action item because I don't want this one to just okay, great, let's move on. I need to take that space there. So that's what I'm going to take for an action item. That said, what do you have, sir?
Officially, I have nothing. Unofficially.
See, isn't that weird?
It is, but it's not at the same time because I feel like, I don't know. If you were to push me for some specific ones, I could give them to you. So one thing that I've already done from this, I kind of mentioned the whole story behind August Landmesser, and there's definitely a sermon in that. Which I probably will present some form of that. We've got a men's rally at our church this Friday. So I'm already thinking this is going to be part of what I'm going to be talking about. But also it's really just inspirational. It's not, I don't want to say it's corrective, but kind of it's not, you need to make this specific adjustment. It's really just, here are some stories about people who had courage, and it inspires you to try to be like them. But really, it's just developing the character that you need to rise to the moment when it presents itself. And I don't know how you plan that. I think there's some stuff I'm dealing with personally where this is already beneficial and helpful, but there's not anything that I specifically want to do out of this. Yeah, so I'm with you with no official action items, but I also don't think that means this book was not impactful either.
Right. Okay, so style and rating. It's a holiday book, so there's tons of stories you've not heard before, most likely. I noticed in this particular case, he has a tendency to take a story or a specific character, person in history, and tell you a lot of stories about that person from angles you've not heard about. There are things with corruption in the New York Police Department in the past, and he explains so many different aspects of that, and that's just one example. He does that many times through this. again, Ryan's easy to read. He's an expert communicator. He's very good at putting his book together. And in this particular case, like we have books that are, there's either a system or a specific action item they're wanting you to take. This one doesn't really have that, which is probably why we don't have an action item. You know, if you're reading Atomic Habits, it's pretty easy to come out of that with an action item to build certain habits. That's an easy one. This is not that. It is not geared towards that. It's not even that style. It's more of an inspirational book, but more than that, yes, it's an inspirational type book, but it's got, like as Blake is saying in the comments here in the chat, it's more like a call to action. Like let's move, like start now. And the question is, in what direction and what are you going to work towards? It's not necessarily this is the specific thing I want you to do. This is the notebook I want you to use. It doesn't have that at all. But it's like, I don't feel like I can just sit anymore. Like, I feel like I've got to be doing something now. But the question is, what is that? Which is why I think I've got the action item of just like, I need to marinate on this because I feel like I should be moving now. And I don't know where. Like, that's kind of the feeling I've got on it, which is a really interesting dynamic that I can't say I've had from a book in a while. So there's that. As far as rating, I can't find any reason to rate this anything less than a 5.0. I know we just did a double 5.0, but like to me, this is a top-notch book. It's Ryan Holiday once again. I have a very hard time arguing with him on really anything. He's showing me an interconnectedness between our nonfiction books and scripture. He's got me wanting to do big things and I don't know what. Like, he's ticked off all the boxes here. And I'm not sure what to fault him for other than, what do I do now, Ryan? Like, come on. So there is that aspect. So anyway, all that to say, I'm going to put it at 5.0.
All right. Well, this is an easy 5.0 for me as well. There, done. No, just kidding.
Okay. All right. So what's next?
I will say that this book being the first of the series of 4, I think this one is 5.0, but I could see the other ones not impacting me like this one does. He lays out at the beginning that courage is kind of the foundational virtue that all of the other ones are built on top of. So I feel this one, he's really got to get you excited about if you're going to apply anything from the following ones. And he did that very effectively. But I don't think that the other books in this series are automatically 5.0 just because this one was. I also want to address something Blake mentioned in the chat. It says Ryan has a way of writing that almost has a driving, urgent style that can be difficult to read if you're in a relaxing mode, a call to action instead of just informing. I agree with that. I think that's good. I think that if you are looking for a casual read, this is not for you. But I feel for anybody who is concerned about doing the best they can with what they have, which would be most of the people listening to Bookworm, and I'm not implying that Blake doesn't fall into this category as well, but this is an essential read. It's almost like one of those ones where, yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable on purpose. I mentioned Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and I recommend that book more than any other book we have read, but it's never something that I am like, oh, you just got to read this, you're going to love it. It's like, you got to read this because it's going to change you. You're not going to like it. It's going to be very difficult. You'll probably cry. But it's important, and you have to go through that at least once in your life. That's kind of how I feel with this book. And I don't even think any of the things that Ryan mentioned in this were completely life-changing. Never heard this before. A lot of these things I had heard before because I kind of had become a student of leadership. Just as an example, one of the things that he mentioned in here, which we didn't really talk about in this last section, but there's totally a conversation to be had about this, is the whole idea of the audacity of hope. He says leaders are dealers in hope. Essentially, a leader is a salesperson. So anybody who says to me, well, I'm just not a salesperson, first thing I ask them is like, are you married? Because if you're married, you sold yourself at least once. And
Yep.
real leaders are not salespeople like we would think of salespeople, the snake oil salespeople, where they're just looking to get something. They are looking to help other people authentically and get them to a place. But that's essentially, if you are a leader, you are selling the fact that you can get people from where they are to where they want to go. Otherwise, they're not going to follow you. And a true leader is going to accept that responsibility, and they're going to take that seriously. Bible says that pastors are going to be counted double judgment. You know, it's one of the things I appreciate about my church and my pastors. They take that seriously, and they don't want to steer you in the wrong direction. They want to present the truth and let you make your own decisions. And that's kind of what Ryan Holiday is doing here. Is he's giving you the facts. He's telling you that you're made for more, essentially, and what are you going to do about it? So I think that's good. It should inspire you to change some things. It should make you uncomfortable maybe with the way you've been living. Even though I have been trying to do this my entire life, I still feel that reading this, I feel like I really haven't been going after this to the degree that I should. So there is that inspirational aspect to it. But yeah, you can't just read this and sit back and do nothing. If you do that, then you have completely missed the point. So I guess that's the only thing I can say about this book is you got to expect that going into it. If you want an easy read, if you want a casual read, pick up something about digital minimalism or the minimalist home or something like that, you know, where, someday
Yep.
when I can eliminate this
Right.
clutter, that's going to be great. But all the stories that he talks about in here, all of the pictures that he paints of these people who did these heroic and courageous things, none of those situations were easy. None of them were enjoyable. It was always this person went through this horrendous thing, and that is why history remembers them. And so you walk away from this inspired to be one of those people that history remembers. But yeah, it's going to require some sacrifice.
Yep. This is a book I was reading in the mornings, and it didn't occur to me that it was such a driving and urgent style because, like, hey, that works great because I'm getting my day started. But if I was trying to read that at night when I was getting ready to go to sleep, I don't think I would sleep too well because I'd feel like I should be acting on something instead. So there's that. That said, what's coming up next, Mike? We got another double 50. This might be the first time we've had a back-to-back double 50, but we'll see if the next ones can hold up to that standard. What's
next is A Minute to Think by Juliet Funt. And I had never heard of this book prior to it being recommended to me by somebody in my mastermind group. I floated the idea a little while ago to the people in my group. What's the most impactful book you've read this year? And so this is one that came up from that conversation, and I'm excited to jump into it.
Cool. Following that, I suppose you don't know this yet either. I feel like it's time we cover one that's brought up fairly regularly by an author that we've read everything else from, but haven't read this from. And we need to cover this, I think, because I feel like I want a bookworm episode on this book, but it doesn't exist yet. And that is So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. I feel like we need to cover this, right? Like it's almost sad that we haven't done this yet. It's a well-known book, right? But we need to cover this. So I think it's time.
Yes, it is time.
There's that. So Joe's coming out of crazy. I need to take a breather. And then I'm going to be stepping into the next book, which means no Gap books right now. But I do see Gap books coming back in my near future, which is super exciting. But what do you have for a Gap book?
I have Write Useful Books by Rob Fitzpatrick.
Okay.
It's basically about writing better nonfiction, and that's
Okay.
what I like. One of the things, so this is an official action item, but one of the things that this book has inspired me to do is to start writing more consistently. I've published a couple of newsletters the last several weeks. I'll put a link in the show notes if people want to subscribe to the newsletter. But I was always apprehensive about it before because anytime you publish a newsletter, you get a whole bunch of people unsubscribing. And so from a numbers perspective, it's almost like one of the worst things you can do. But I know it's something that I should be doing.
Yep.
And I didn't really understand the impact that was having on the people who actually wanted to hear from me. So I sent the first one and I got like a dozen responses within the first couple of hours saying, "Oh, it's so great to see this again." So one of the things that this book has inspired me to do is to write more. And obviously, one of the things I want to write eventually is an updated version of my Thou Shalt Hustle book. I want to lean into that, talk about being courageous. That again, an unofficial action item, right? But that term hustle, there's this whole hustle culture that is very, I have a distasteful response to that. But as I was thinking about it, I'm like, oh, I lost that battle for that word. You know, Gary V's taken it in a different direction. But then I started thinking, this is a stupid definition of courage, right? But what's the courageous thing to do? Lean into it. If I think it means something else, then let's define it as something else. And you know what? The people who are in that hustle culture, who are going to stumble onto my book because it has it in the title, those are the exact people that need to hear that message anyways. So
There you go. All right. Well, thanks to you who are watching and listening to Bookworm. Thank you so much. We keep going because we like doing this, but also because you're here as well. And we're grateful to you. So one of the ways that I know people support us, and we're very grateful for those of you who do this, is to join the Bookworm membership club. You can do that at bookworm.fm/membership. It's $5 a month. You help us to buy books, keep the lights on, pay the hosting, pay Toby so we get editing done, all sorts of fun stuff in that sense. Basically keeping Bookworm going. And you also get some cool perks that come along for the ride whenever you do that. Not just the goodwill of keeping Bookworm alive, but also some cool wallpaper that Mike put together, all of Mike's MindNode files that he's been able to create, unless they were so extensive that it would have been ridiculous. So there are those. There's some old Gap book episodes I did on some books that I read that weren't official Bookworm books. And, you know, there's a lot to it. So again, bookworm.fm/membership. We'd love to have you on board.
all right. If you are reading along with us, pick up A Minute to Think by Juliet Funt, and we will talk to you in a couple of weeks.